Hello, I'm Sheelasha. My acknowledgement to the original and traditional custodians of the land, and we're very grateful to be here. And thank you all for coming here in the morning. The micro exhibition that me and Hitman have curated is called Tamba, and it's in this building on the third floor, right on the corner. It's one big room. So seven artists, seven indigenous artists, who is currently, if we talk of according to the nation state in that way, six of them are from Nepal and one of them are from India and the Eastern Himalayan region. What you see here is a very small snapshot of the entirety. So I have to acknowledge that it's not an entire justice as well to the kind of work they have been doing. Most of them are activists, and art is a strong medium. They feel comfortable expressing their stories of origin, stories of trauma, stories of generational pain that they have been carrying and embodying in their bodies. Healing is something that is central to the exhibition as well. We, as a practicing artist and curator, and the artists who are presented there, are also have gone through multiple burnt out with systemic injustices. How do we deal with the burnt out, with the pain? Let me know if I'm too fast. Okay. So healing is something through the medicinal plant, through shamanistic practices. Most of them come from the lineage of shamans. One of them are practicing shaman as well. How they're trying to reclaim the intangible heritages while at the same time fighting on the streets. And using multiple mediums to express those. So you can see up there terracotta, textiles, print, woodblock printmaking, paintings, poems, film, etc. So I'm just giving we're gonna talk more about it. Maybe Hitman, you can say a bit more of Tamba.
Uh, Thank you everyone for being here with us. It's a pleasure to be back. So I was a part of APT8 as an artist. So now I'm coming here as a co-curator for the Tamba project. So I'll just give a brief background of to just understand the context of Nepal and the region. So Nepal has went through lots of social and political changes in a very short time period, and how this, uh, different political and social changes has affected collectively and person individually. So Tamba is a person in a Tamang community who sing a song using a dompu. It's an instrument, musical instrument, special instrument in different rituals and ceremonies to pass the knowledge of their, like origin of story of the origins, also their history to generations to generation. That's good.
So quickly, before we pass, this is something I think what we want to acknowledge is it's it's one of a small output of the kinship we have built from past 12 years. Three of the artists were part of an artist collective, one of the first indigenous artist collective named as Art Nepal, which both Hitman and I am part of. It has been a collective journey of understanding and helping each other, but also some of the other artists who are presented here, we met during the process of protest, and some other artists. It was a different way where we came to know each other and have been working with each other, and also have been there, especially also in the breakdowns of each other, where we could hold on to each other's hand. And I'm really grateful that I am part of this collective of people who are genuinely there for each other and happy for each other. And I'm really grateful for this found kins.
And so maybe just to go into some of the works that are in the display, could you maybe tell us a kind of, there's quite a few works that bring together, I guess, both political histories and communist political histories together with indigenous and shamanistic practices, and how artists are kind of negotiating these multiple histories within the same work?
So it's how the one of the foundation of this small exhibition was sharing this collective stories of how different communities were enforced to follow the same law or the identity or the like the segregations by the rulers back like 250 years, and which was more established as a civil code in 1854 by the Rana regimes. So lots of indigenous communities and marginalized communities were categorized as enslaved, alcohol drinker communities. It's very like caste and ethnicity based, and till this date, how these different like communities been affected by this kind of injustice law and enforced law, and it's still with now like Nepal is a like federal republic democratic of Nepal, and lots of people sacrifice their lives to fight for justice and sovereignties. But it's still like with lots of indigenous community and marginalized communities doesn't feel it been well addressed and established. Uh, so uh, yeah, so lots of like this, our communities and the Dalit community, women and marginalized community join different revolution in different time. But somehow we feel we've been betrayed and hijacked by the same, like by the high class or the elite, or and but this is also become like a collective uh, experience, realities, and sharing our stories all together of like resistance, or like Sheelasha said, healing ourselves or existing in this land ourselves. Yeah.
Did you want to add anything to that? No? Okay. So maybe we might bring Zac into the conversation, just in terms, Zac, in terms of you also are bringing kind of many different, I guess, histories and collective memories. I'm thinking particularly about the jigsaw works. Maybe if you would like to kind of speak to
Sure,
that.
I can. Yeah, I can speak to that. You'll have to forgive me as well. My voice has started to go over the last couple of days, but I'll do my best. Yeah, and I just wanted to say what an honour to be here, really, to speak with you guys, and what an amazing exhibition this is. To be just one node in it, but that kind of, I guess, relates to a lot of levels in my work. There is this kind of continual theme of like the one and the many. So the jigsaw puzzles are a kind of perfect metaphor for, I guess, collective organization, but also to play with that. So the jigsaw puzzles as a form are essentially, they're a collage. So they're two different images that fit perfectly together, but so they're swapped by hand into each other to kind of, I guess, form a new picture. But this kind of struck me as this quite beautiful medium to think about history and to think about the folds of time, and to bring together certain kind of, I guess, a lot of my work is quite research-based, and then I have these forms, and jigsaw puzzles are one of those forms that kind of allow me to, I guess, meditate in different interests. And quite specifically, up in the space here, there's a very large jigsaw puzzle, about 4 by 3 meters, which is made up of 32,000 pieces. And they were all hand swapped into each other, but the connection in that particular work, which relates to this folding of time or history, was I was reading this interview with the NASA space agency, the Hubble Telescope Agency, and how they actually construct these images of deep space. So the telescopes, like the James Webb Telescope and Hubble, they operate with infrared cameras. So to the human eye, it's essentially black and white. And to make these images like press ready to kind of inspire awe and to also kind of share, I guess, the science of what these telescopes are doing for these scientists. They make these images. They're quite well known. The one in the show upstairs is the Pillars of Creation, so that's kind of been around since 1995. But ultimately, with them being infrared kind of data points, they have an artisanal team that developed what they call the Hubble palette. And they developed this palette based on 19th century sublime landscape painting. So the puzzle up there has a cloud study painting by John Constable. So very much of the era, and you can see the palette relates. So this struck me as just like an amazing twist of kind of history repeating itself in a weird way, because growing up in New Zealand, landscape painting from the 19th century was, it's a big part of our art history, but it's a big part of the colonial project and a big part of, I guess, selling foreign lands. And that's what, it's almost like they were kind of real estate adverts, and often depicting like a very passive indigenous presence, like not visible. But anyway, this kind of connection that NASA, which is also, it's the National Space Agency of America, it's an American project, kind of this space is like this new frontier, just a lot of crazy kind of twists in it. I guess the work is a way to kind of think about how a lot of the other works, which we'll speak to too, is a way to think about how time folds in on itself, and the past is kind of really with us, even in a like space photo.
And that kind of politics of the image, I think, is quite interesting. And I think in the Tamba project, there's a lot of works that are questioning those kind of national imagery and then making new imagery, First Nations imagery, as a way to kind of put that imagery into circulation, because it's not normally the thing that's on display or archived. Did you kind of want to talk about that?
Yeah, most of the artists take reference from, in terms of like actual image and the mainstream archive. So when indigenous people go into finding the history, they just find that they have been subjugated in those archives. So archiving history is not a place something many communities can be proud of. Then there's definitely a place where one has to either speculate or entirely rewrite the history itself on their own terms, and not in the terms of the rulers. So most of the artists have goes and kind of like takes out those imageries and also questions that. One of the artist Subhas Tamang, he's from Tamang indigenous community, and I think Hitman mentioned that his community was segregated into Masinya Matwali, which can translate into enslavable or killable alcohol drinkers. And he has also written that in the print. So he has this large 20-feet wood block print, all made by hand. In one of the panel, he kind of like poetically talks about depicts the protest where but the protest happens in the past, and he also takes reference of a poet who writes a similar kind of poem. And the protest happens in the past, and as a speculation, and the human they have that in the instrument that Hitman mentioned, the domfu instead of their head. So he's imagining, and there is a sculpture of the ruler, the colonizer, and then he speculates that in the past, all the Tamang people goes in front of him and takes the domfu as an instrument and plays the instrument and protest for their rights. So yes, the artists are taking imagery, but they want to reclaim their place in the history as well, in their own terms. The same artist not here, but one of the work he did in the past was, I will write my own history. So he kind of erased the existing history where his community was demonized and dehumanized, and then he creates a blank slate. Another work I would like to give example is of Make Limbu from Limbu indigenous community, and he's got this like 30-meter big long textile that he made all by himself. He launched it just this year, and then he made everything by him, weaved everything by himself. So so that particular way of weaving itself is also kind of slowly dying now because it is being replaced by another kind of textile with which is made by Jacquard's loom, which is the another textile is called Dhaka, and it's more popular. And also making this one, it takes time. So for younger people, it's also technically, logistically difficult to sustain just by just doing that. So there are only few people, elders, who can also teach. So he went there and learned that. And then he brought in the symbols of the traditional textiles, which means universe, which depicts universe, star, forest, etc. And then he composed his own stories in that. But for him, it's important that he goes on the street for protest, but he also to continue this knowledge of textile making, which is slightly more fragile. And sometimes we have also conflict with activists, like mainstream activists, because they're like, oh no, going on the street is only important. Like, why are you displaying on this concrete building? It's so elite or something like that. But I think that's also such an ableist way of looking at things. And mainstream feminism also, but also activist. Also, it's sometimes very Western driven as well. But also, like there are different kinds of people, and not everybody's privileged to go on the street. People are like, there are disabled people, people are in the role of caregiving, etc. And there are different textures and different, the histories and memories also transfers in different ways, not just like shouting. And then I think it's really important to acknowledge that there are different ways of being, and not to erase that as well.
You said erase, and I can't help but think about some of the erasures that you've done in your work. Would you like to talk about the marble works?
Sure, yeah. Well, this is also, so I guess there's some images of the works as they were being in production, but this is really a new body of work for me. So I'm still kind of starting to understand it, it's still settling, but ultimately, there are 5 marble sculptures, and the project is called Memory Garden. So I was quite interested in, well, I guess, kind of some of the what gets the most visibility, and when we think about art, or what is the most kind of well-known image, and this is often kind of Western classical sculpture, so Michelangelo's David or something like this. But the project, as I've kind of followed it, is I became really interested in scholars' rocks, which is more this, I guess, tradition from Asia, from Japan and China as well. But where a naturally formed stone is the object of reverence. It is that is the subject in and of itself. And one of the things I noticed about a lot of these classical sculptures is that they're often the figures, on a carved stone, standing on a clump of land or earth with a tree stump, often as like an engineering device to support the weight of the sculpture. But so I thought, well, what would happen if that became the center? Like, what's at the margins of our attention? What if we put rock being rock as the object or subject of our focus and attention? So ultimately, there's also a kind of speculative aspect to the works, which maybe there's like an imagining of what if these never existed, or there's a kind of void, potentially quite violent voiding of these bodies. I mean, so many bodies around the world, and nation states, as we're talking, and especially like indigenous histories, have been kind of removed from the picture. I guess there's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek aspect to these works, which is a meditation on, well, what if this was absent? What if that was no longer here? So there's something as well, kind of maybe post-apocalyptic or pre-apocalyptic. Again, I'm still trying to understand what these works are, but effectively that is what they are. They're one-to-one recreations at scale in marble of some of these most well-known works from throughout art history, but with the human figures removed. The other thing about those works that took a long time to kind of model, and I guess really my input was the negative space where the body joins the stone or the tree. In some instances, there's a piece by Canova that's from the 19th century, Psyche Revived by Cupid's Kiss, that is in the Louvre. And the figures are so well finished that there's kind of no trace of them on the rock. But then you have something like Rodin's The Kiss, and he quite famously didn't finish. He let the bodies of his figures like join the stone. So I spent a lot of time like imagining the negative shapes of those bodies into the rock. So there's a kind of indexing or ghosting. Yeah, I guess the works are about absence and presence and traces in a lot of ways. But yeah, it was a big roundabout way of saying.
And I think when we were talking the other day, you were saying there was also this kind of history of, I guess, recognizing missing people through a planting of a tree. Could you talk about that way as a way to, I guess, make the missing person present versus your very present person being taken away? Yeah.
So, yeah, one of the works in Tamba projects by Lobkan Chaudhary, so he's from Tharo indigenous community from plain of Nepal, southern part of Nepal. So he recently did one memorial monuments dedicating to the disappeared people from his community in Bardia region. So there we found out one really interesting stories. Not stories actually. It's reality. And we met with these different families who are planting a tree in the memory of their disappeared loved ones. So it's very political in a way, but also in a very subtle manner, like because if you because we have seen lots of these monuments has been destroyed or like taken out by when the government is changed or like the opposition came in power, then it doesn't exist anymore, and lots of these memorial monuments or gates been destroyed, which were in memory of lots of martyrs during the People's War. So for this family, this tree became a symbols of their loved one, and they go every day to the tree, near to tree, and talk to them. So it's not just like symbols of memory, but also living being for them. So it's always like give sense of for them that their missing one is still alive, whom like you can share your all day experience or whatever emotions in front of it.
And even if the government has tried to erase all the evidence, for the community, the living tree then becomes witness of the horrors.
And you've carved a tree. Can you?
This is a- but no, this does actually relate to, I guess, in a really different way. But I was just thinking about how, well, one of the metaphors I've used in my work or analogies has been this metaphor of Theseus's ship. And I was just appreciating what you were saying about, like, I guess, a monument becoming kind of alive in a way or activated through time. And that to me is like this really, if there's one kind of ethic to my work, it is about underlying that everything is a process, not a object or a finitely named thing. And so one of the metaphors that I've used is this Theseus's ship, which is a Greek thought problem which asks if parts of that boat are repaired and replaced throughout time, can you still call it the same ship? The answer is obviously yes. But what it points to is that, you know, a ship in this instance is, it's a process. It's not a finite thing. And this relates to the tree axe up there, because within this part of the world, within Australia and New Zealand, I've heard this metaphor or analogy being reused through the lens of James Cook's axe. So James Cook took the same axe on all of the voyages that he took, but because it traveled with him through his life, the axe handle would wear out and become replaced with a different wood. So I've kind of, the work is a bit of a meditation on that, but what it essentially is a store-bought axe from a hardware store, and then I've hand carved it myself, with like whittling it right down to its core to make a representation of a sapling, so from which that axe would have grown, the wood for that axe would have grown. So there's the work, I guess, to me, and with the jigsaw puzzles and the marble sculptures too, the ethic there is about understanding that everything is a process, not a reducible thing, I guess, if that makes sense.
Is that also why it was important for you to hand make that? And when you talk about the jigsaws, you often mention the fact that it's hand done.
Well, it's meticulous and it's slow, and I guess there's an element of time in that, and there, I always kind of think, well, the process of making the work is so much what the work is. So, kind of recollaging a jigsaw puzzle, to me, that's the meaning is in that act. It's the work is almost, it's more deed than it is a painting, or do you know what I mean?
Yes. And to come back to Tumba, I thought maybe could you speak to some of the works that are thinking about the environment and the importance of the environment to the artists, and that there's a kind of element there as well.
Not in mainstream in the sense that not in a way, like the mainstream discussion about save environment. I don't know how to put this together. And it's more about how indigenous communities have coexisted with what is called non-living thing, because for them it's not non-living thing, it's like a kin, right? And then how do we share the space and not take over it or not extract it, or for example with birds and animals also, there are strict rules on certain season you don't do fishing because fish get pregnant at that time, or there are like um, um, uh, rituals before going in the forest. You take permission from the spirit of the forest. So in that larger sense, that how our schoolings and universities and societies have erased or seen that, label that as savage way of being, but how can we then start to reclaim those, not just knowledge but ways of being also. One of the challenges like artists have felt was most of them, not all, but most of them studied in fine art college where the course of study was very Eurocentric, where everybody was taught about dead white artists, and then it was not relatable to the existing reality. So there was a lot of unlearning process as well. But then also have to acknowledge the indigenous movements itself, because of the condition it was in, sometimes can be more agenda focused than reclaiming the livelihood and intangible heritages. And that's something after the People's War and federalism movements in Nepal. I think in this phase, the artists and many other activists also trying to, it's quite challenging, because what do you do? Either you assimilate into the system, or to reclaim your own entire system is also very challenging. How do you have that balance? And in terms of like environment, like you said, like it's actually about reclaiming the entire system itself in a way, but it's a bit challenging as well. Do you want to add anything? But in a way how artists are trying to use the material itself also shows how they're trying to kind of like practice that, because as I said, for them also with this generation, while using mobile and internet, which obviously takes so much of environmental, like, like resources itself, and it's yeah, I myself personally think a lot about it. How do we have a balance while trying to exist in this already so much destroyed world?
But yeah, I think in Mick's works, in these long textiles, he had, like brought this recent issue that's his community is facing. In it's it's a Hindu name, given name, name known as a Pathivara, but Subhasai, what's the
Mukulum.
yeah? So now this, like corporates are building a cable car, for the this religious tourist, and so lots of our friends been protesting against this because they've been cutting lots of trees to build this cable car. So yeah, you can see those images and references in his this long textiles, and also Alan's work is directly related to how the hydropower dams been affected, and like destroying the river's Tista, which is sacred to her community. because it's considered as a mother's in her community.
I think one of the label which indigenous people are given when they are protesting and trying protest means like just basically trying to protect their own land and resources is they are called anti-development or anti-nationalist, sometimes terrorist also. Not so much in Nepal, but in India. So because they're like, oh, we're building like this smart city, we're bringing electricity, we're bringing fantastic highway, and but we need to sacrifice some trees for that.
Being smart would be living with the environment.
Yeah, where there would be so many thousands of different ways to coexist. But for that, like it's like just like destruction is the only modern way of being, and especially I have to add when we are labeled as third world country, like poor country, and I think there's a larger inferiority complex also to fit into the standard of global first world ideas even for the indigenous communities because like you're so tired of being portrayed in certain way in mainstream media, etc. So that there's that another layer of poor country label as well.
Did you have questions for one another?
Also, sorry, I haven't. So the tree, the memory tree in a way, or the memorial tree. How is that presented in your space upstairs? Is that it's more something that you've worked with in the past?
No, it's not directly represented here, but yeah, it's a here it's a more like a part of one of the part of the monuments that Lobkant made in Memorial Park, but the trees is just alongside these monuments. So the trees are planted, like in a very personal level. So the family just came to the memorial park and they plant the tree and put some stones around it, and yeah. Also, yeah, here it's a terracotta works by Lobkant. So in actual monuments, it's like a fourth part. It's like 3D. You can go around, and lots of people already coming and like wishing and for their loved one. Here we only have like one panel, but it illustrate and or depict how his community went through different struggle during the People's War. You can see like bullet holes on these pots that they used, or you can see the scattered sleepers when like when the protest was attacked by the armed force, or you can see like different objects that represent his community, like farming or things like that.
So these are effectively in the space kind of. You said earlier as well this idea of the witness. So some of the objects that brought are kind of they bear witness to these acts as well. Is that yeah?
I guess and are there kind of key things that you hope that audiences will take from this display?
I actually wanted to say a little bit about the three woman identifying artists who are up, and all of them are talking about the burden, the extra burden they have to carry because of the gendered roles. And they talk about breakdowns. And Indu Tharu talks about when men in the protest where men were arrested by the army and police, then how women had to take over the protest. Uh, and then they wore a traditional attire as a symbol of protest. But then when the protest was over, then the traditional attire nehenga then becomes the symbol of feminine design again, like oh, go back to your own gender role, like something like that. So she expressed the dissatisfaction of that, and Alien and Kipa talks about breakdowns, but then it's very tricky to talk about breakdown openly when you are a woman, and I resonate that as well, because you can easily be seen as crazy woman. You can easily be dismantled systematically in the history, colonially, and in the medical history also, how a lot of neurodivergent women are also, for example, not diagnosed, for a simple example. And they find ways to talk about it through their art. Then here the art then becomes a medium where they are healing, but also being themselves and expressing their trauma in a way. But both of them also talk about post breakdown. When you reflect back on yourself, maybe it's not necessarily always the evil thing, because then it opens up this whole gateway to another dimension of yourself which you were consciously blocking because you had to marks yourself to sustain and survive in this world. And then once you cannot do that, then you're like gone. Also, in many activism movement, you're only as good enough as when you are functional, and when you're not functional anymore, you're like, even in the activism space, you're discarded. So that's the pain people do talk about. They also talk about the pain you have to go through when you have conflict with your own people, with your own loved ones. What do you do about it? There are hierarchies within your own communities. Like in my own community, we have caste system. Kipa does talk about that. I'll talk about what do you do about the way of being, because she's a shaman, but we do not want to see shamanism or indigenous community in one monolithic way or romanticized view, because there are conflicts with elders which they don't want to maybe evolve in the current way and time. And then Alan is kind of like trying to find ways in that. So this is something we wanted to kind of acknowledge also, how the artists have seen through their art and the process ways of healing as well. And maybe while everybody was fighting so much for their community, then after breakdown, they also kind of realize a small pocket where, maybe it's also time to take care of oneself as well.
Yeah. It's very important that you're protesting to sustain a life, but if you're exhausted by doing that, then what are you kind of protesting? What are you saving? Yeah. Did you have any final comments?
I want to acknowledge Subhas Thebe is here, and we have a very small group of like indigenous activist artists in our region, and I'm so glad you're here and Tian is here.
Any final words? Yeah. So the works that we've been talking about today can be seen on level 3 of the Gallery of Modern Art in the Souris galleries at either end of those spaces. So I really hope that after this conversation, you'll take some time and spend more time with the works and kind of reflect more deeply on the amazing work that Zac's made and Sheelasha and Hitman have kind of brought to us here in Brisbane. So if you could please join me in thanking them.